Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt, and you might notice no Dylan today. We're doing things a little bit different. It is the new year. The current Oscar race is not done, but it's not too early. I mean, you could argue it is too early, but for me, it's not too early to get excited about what is coming next year. This video is going to be packed with movies for you to look forward to, movies for you to seek out, and maybe, just maybe, this might be able to inform a little bit of your list of films that you're putting together for next year, whenever you start predicting next year. Anyways, before we get into next year's stuff, I just want to give some credentials here. I did one of these videos last year talking about all the Best Picture contenders that are on the horizon, and I just want to say, of my top 10 last year, I would say that 5 of my last year top 10 on January 1st, I still have in my top 10, and I feel confident will be making that final 10. Now, I did have The Color Purple as my winning pick the first time I spoke about this year's Best Picture race last year. We are now seeing officially that is a pretty big L. It just premiered. It did really well on the first day and has just been slipping and slipping and slipping. So that is not looking too promising for my last year predictions. But to make up for it, I did have The Holdovers at my number 3 spot, Killers of the Flower Moon at my number 4 spot, Maestro at number 6, Poor Things at number 7, Oppenheimer at number 9. So that is 5 out of the current, I think, consensus top 10. And then to follow that up, I also had Barbie at number 16. I will say there was some doubts at the time about Barbie. You know, was it just going to be a commercial movie? Was it just going to be a little bit of a less awardsy film from Greta Gerwig? And it was, but it was so good and so popular that it broke through anyways. And then I had The Zone of Interest at my number 28 spot. That is 7 that I had on my list of 30 last year. So I was missing out on American Fiction, which I didn't know existed at the time, Anatomy of a Fall, which I didn't know existed at the time, and Past Lives, which I had completely looked over on that Sundance lineup. Now, I do have a Sundance film that I'm going to be talking about today, and hopefully I'm not missing this year's big Past Lives movie from Sundance. I feel really confident that of the films I talk about today, if you plug my top 10 in here at this time next year, you'll probably have 5 or 6 of them right. Beyond that, if you go through my whole list, I'm going to talk about 40 films today. If you go through my whole list and pick and choose, I think I probably am going to have 7 or 8 of our eventual Best Picture top 10 next year in this whole roundup. Now, that means that there's going to be at least one Fall Fest contender that we just do not know exists at this point. We have no way of knowing exists. The next year's American Fiction, there is no possible way we could figure out what that is. Same with Anatomy of a Fall. Next year's Cannes contender, we probably do not know exists at this point, or we're completely writing it off. For me, last year, if you had told me that a Justine Triet film was going to be in the Best Picture consensus, I would have said, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. You're crazy. There's absolutely no way that I could predict that at this point. So, without further ado, let's get into the video, and we're going to start off with my number 1 pick, my current Best Picture winner prediction for next year. Now, last year I said The Color Purple. That did not pan out for me. So this year, instead of going with a blockbuster, I am going indie. I am picking Sing Sing. This is being distributed by A24. It's directed by Greg Quedar, and the cast features Coleman Domingo and Paul Raci. The premise of Sing Sing follows a theater troupe in a jail putting on a performance to escape the realities of their current situation, of their incarceration. Also, as a bit of narrative, it features former inmates as part of the cast. This premiered at TIFF to absolutely stellar reviews. The reactions for Sing Sing were through the roof. A24 snapped it up at TIFF immediately. I didn't get to see it at TIFF, unfortunately, because it was under my radar. This could even possibly get an Oscar for Coleman Domingo. Now, we know that when A24 has a big contender, they can push it really far. What it really depends on is that they have something that audiences can connect with as well as critics. And this seems like it straddles that line perfectly. It seems like it has an inspirational story as well as an inspirational narrative, with the fact that it's using actual former inmates as cast members of the film. It just seems like one of the darlings of next year, one of the indie sensations. And because we have the actors strike that happened this year, and a lot of those big productions that we would expect to see this year won't be ready in time or haven't shot yet, it's very possible that an independent film that has been held back from 2023 to 2024 could really hit well. Now, some points against this, though. It is very likely that A24 will release this in the summertime, like they did with Past Lives. And what we're seeing with Past Lives right now is that while it's incredibly strong, it's only strong in a couple of categories. The question I have is, will Sing Sing, if released in the summertime, will it be able to maintain the buzz to stay at that number 1, number 2 spot, or will it drop down to where Past Lives currently is, which is like the number 7, number 8 slot in that Best Picture race, where it's definitely a contender, but it's not really in that win contention where we initially thought it might be. Also, it's possible that people were overhyping it at TIFF, that the people that saw it there are the type that would love this no matter what, and maybe this isn't actually that accessible to those mainstream audiences. The same thing happened again with Past Lives. When people saw it at Sundance, they were saying, oh my god, this is the steal your heart indie darling of the year. This is the movie that everyone's going to be talking about. This is a crowd pleaser. And then when general audiences saw it, yeah, people liked it, but it was definitely not the crowd pleaser that was sold by Sundance. I wonder if Sing Sing might be another one of those too indie to win movies that we fall for a little bit too early. And then later on, it kind of becomes clear that this is not that consensus film that we expected. This is not a coda indie. That, to me, is the biggest risk with having Sing Sing at number 1 at this point. But that said, I do feel really good about it right now. I feel like Coleman Domingo will come along with it for Best Actor nomination or win, possibly. Paul Raci, I've heard great things about too. So I feel confident that this will be nominated next year. At my number 2 slot is Blitz. This is being distributed by Apple TV+. It is directed by Steve McQueen, who you know from 12 Years a Slave, from Small Axe. The cast of this one includes Saoirse Ronan, who a lot of people say is overdue for some Oscar love. The premise of this film follows a group of Londoners during the Blitz in World War II. Not much more has been released about the film. Steve McQueen is going to be doing a period piece of this scale with Apple TV money like Scorsese had this year for Killers of the Flower Moon. That is an incredibly exciting premise, and it's one that I think we're going to see in that Best Picture top 10 next year, unless things go horrifically wrong. It'll be 11 years from when 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture, and I think, honestly, Steve McQueen really, really is due for another nomination at this point. Apple has had it finished for quite a while, or it was finished shooting quite a while ago, and there was thoughts that maybe Blitz would be able to release this year, and Apple decided not to rush it out and instead wait to next year. And what that could say to you is, oh, they just want content for next year. What it says to me is they don't want this competing with Killers of the Flower Moon. That's what I choose to believe. And the Cannes head, Terry Fremeau, he had hinted that Blitz would be at Cannes this coming year. So 2024, Blitz is likely to premiere at Cannes. We could see this be this year's Oppenheimer level film, not in terms of commercial success, but in terms of awards success. This might just be that period piece that people, critics and audiences, just absolutely eat up. Now, some things against this one, just because we have to give those points on both ends. Steve McQueen is one of those filmmakers who might just be destined to never make an Oscar movie again. Keep in mind, before 12 Years a Slave, he made the films Hunger, which is about a guy starving himself to death in a prison, and Shame, which is about a dude who has so much sex that he ruins his life. And he made Small Axe, a TV series of kinda art films, and then he made a full-on installation piece art film, Occupied City. He's just a filmmaker that is incredibly interesting and not really thinking about those mainstream sensibilities that we kind of sometimes need to get into Oscar success. You could just say, honestly, sometimes Steve McQueen's movies might just be too smart for the Oscars. 12 Years a Slave might have just been a fluke. And again, if the approach is anything like what he did with Small Axe or Occupied City, then I would say Blitz is very possibly going to move down to a lower tier contender that critics will still really like, but might not end up being the Oscar juggernaut that we hope and expect it to be. Let's move to the next. At number 3 is Dune Part 2, being distributed by Warner Brothers. This is directed by Denis Villeneuve. It stars Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Jason Momoa, Javier Bardem, Stellan Skarsgård, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken. Look, how much do I need to talk about Dune Part 2? You guys know Dune Part 2. You watched Dune Part 1. If you're an Oscar person, you saw Dune Part 1. This is Dune Part 2. We all wanted it to come out this year. Now it's coming out next year. The first film was, of course, such a huge Oscar success. It's hard to imagine that the sequel to that film, which by all reports, including from the director himself, this is a step up from the first film. How would that miss? You can't miss with that. Now, I do believe this is going to perform a little bit worse than the first one. It's not going to clean up the text the same way that the first one did because the novelty is gone. That novelty, which really propels films to win in those craft categories, it's not here anymore. You're just retreading a lot of the same territory, but that said, it's still getting nominated all across the board. It just might not be winning all of those categories. But here's the biggest thing against it. It has a March release date. Now, if this just had a March release date normally, I would be like, yeah, this scares me. But we know it was supposed to be released in November, and they just pushed it back a few months to March. They don't want to push it a full year back, so they're just releasing it a few months later. This is still an issue because is something like this, is a major blockbuster like this going to be able to sustain the buzz the entire year long? And I think because it's Dune, yes, I do expect it to be able to sustain that buzz. It will not be forgotten, but that March release date is a little bit of a hit against it. It could be overshadowed by bigger sensations that come afterwards. But we've seen in previous years, Everything Ever All at Once, Coda, sometimes releasing early can help you to stand out because you're not being overshadowed by other films that are releasing at the same time. So maybe that March release date is actually a smarter choice than putting it out in November when they initially planned to. And at number 4, I've got my first little bit of a risky pick. And you're going to hear what I'm saying, and you're going to say, why is that risky? That makes no sense to be your risky pick. What do you mean risky? It's the new Francis Ford Coppola movie. And yes, I'm talking about Megalopolis. Megalopolis is currently without distribution. It's directed by Francis Ford Coppola, who you might know from films such as The Godfather Part 2, and Apocalypse Now. This is his first film in quite a few years, and just looking at his IMDb right now, you can see his last film, 2016, Distant Vision, got a 5.2 out of 10. Before that, he made Twixt in 2011, which got a 4.7 out of 10 on IMDb, and then before that, there was Tetro, which is his last relatively well-received film, which got a 6.8 out of 10 in 2009. So Megalopolis is coming off of a string of kind of failures. Now, this has been a passion project for him for at least a few decades. He's been trying to get this made forever. And he's finally got it made, but no one would pay for the film. So he funded it entirely himself. It is a fully independent film, self-funded by Francis Ford Coppola. It stars Adam Driver, Aubrey Plaza, and most interestingly, America's Got Talent winner Grace VanderWaal, who might be the lead role. It's unclear. People think the lead role's Aubrey Plaza, but Francis Ford Coppola made a post on Instagram suggesting that Grace VanderWaal might be the lead character and that she wrote songs for the movie. The premise of Megalopolis follows a sci-fi world. In the not-so-distant future, New York City has been destroyed by a catastrophic event, and two architects with different visions of their work decide to rebuild the city into a utopia. It sounds really expensive, which is why Coppola has not been able to make it up until this point. But at the same time, he's Francis Ford Coppola. It's kind of wild that no one was willing to give him money for this, and there's a lot of red flags flying around this film. But at the same time, every year we get one or two big films that are from directors that honestly are kind of too big to fail. We get films like Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorsese, The Fabelmans from Steven Spielberg. These are the films that we know those are going to be in the Oscar race no matter what at the end of the year. This year, Megalopolis looks like the closest thing we have to one of those, even though Francis Ford Coppola hasn't been in Oscar contention since the 90s with The Godfather Part 3. It's still worth considering him to be part of that club, especially because Megalopolis is a passion project. The films that he's made in the past few years, they don't seem like his heart has been in it, but this one feels a little different. But that said, I just went through all of the red flags with this. No distribution. No one would fund it. The fact that he's been trying to make this for decades and no one has wanted to do it. All of those are big red flags. This could be less of a Killers of the Flower Moon and much more of a Terry Gilliam's The Man Who Killed Don Quixote in the end, where honestly, maybe it ends up just being an interesting mess. But if it's not a mess, it is in for Best Picture. So let's move on to number 5, where I have The Nickel Boys. This is being distributed by Amazon MGM. It's directed by Ramel Ross, a name that you might be familiar with if you are big into documentaries. He directed the spectacular documentary film Hale County This Morning, This Evening, which was nominated for the Oscars back in 2018. The cast of this one features Ethan Harris in the lead role, as well as Fred Heckinger and Anjanou Ellis Taylor. It's based on a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by the author Colson Whitehead, and it follows the story of young boys who went to a juvenile detention center in the 1960s, which was called the Nickel Academy, which was known for being incredibly abusive, neglectful, and even leading to deaths. It's based on a real detention center in Florida, and this is a fictionalized version of that story. Ramel Ross is a very interesting filmmaker. This is his narrative feature debut, and it's going to be really interesting to see what a director like that can bring to a story like this. It's sure to be one of the most intriguing films of the year. Now, that said, I did say it's a Pulitzer Prize winner. That's not always a good way to predict the Oscars, basing it off of the praise of the source material. I think back to 2019 with The Goldfinch, where The Goldfinch was an unmitigated disaster of a film, but everyone had it in their Oscar predictions at one point. That was based on a Pulitzer Prize-winning, highly acclaimed novel, so it's not always the best way to predict. I also think back to August Osage County, which was a Pulitzer Prize-winning play that was adapted to the screen in 2013 with Meryl Streep, Julia Roberts. What could go wrong? Well, people just didn't like it that much. So The Nickel Boys, despite the prestige of the source material, might still just not be the Oscar contender that we expect it to be. Now, at number 6, I have the next film by Yorgos Lanthimos titled Kinds of Kindness. This is being distributed by Searchlight, who just handled his last film, Poor Things, currently in the Oscar conversation. Now, I am a little bit hesitant about keeping on predicting Yorgos for everything, but that said, I was also a little hesitant with Poor Things last year. I had it in my top 10 at this time, but I started to be a little bit more cautious with it through the year because how much is Yorgos Lanthimos making films for the Oscars? I would say I don't think he really cares about the awards, which means at some point he's not going to have the success that he's had with The Favorite and Poor Things. Those films are huge Oscar successes, not because they're Yorgos Lanthimos films, but in spite of being Yorgos Lanthimos films. They're so good that even Yorgos' weird-ass style can't scare the Academy away. Maybe this one could, too. It's an anthology film starring Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Margaret Qualley, and here's the other thing. When doing these early predictions, you have to look at the slate of each distributor for the next year. This is coming from Searchlight Pictures, who is always one of the biggest players in the Academy Awards race. This looks like their biggest movie next year. There's nothing that really comes close to Kinds of Kindness. This just seems like their biggest player. They were initially planning to release this and Poor Things this year, but they pushed this to next year. It's possible that's because they wanted to clear some room for Poor Things to run. It's possible that they wanted this one to also have a little bit more of an Oscar run, too, because you can't really have both of them going at the same time. Now, some points to go against Kinds of Kindness. It is an anthology film. These historically do not do well with the Academy Awards. For example, think back to The French Dispatch, a film that a lot of people predicted for Oscars, which just did not connect, got 0 nominations because of it being an anthology film, because of not having one story that carries all the way throughout. Also, it's possible that this might just not be an Oscar movie. Maybe Yorgos Lanthimos is just trying to go a little bit back to his roots of the Greek weird wave instead of trying to constantly get into the Oscar conversation. Maybe this is a very much one for him title where it just might not need to be accepted and loved by the Oscars the way that some of his other films have. If this gets into Best Picture, he would have 3 Best Picture nominees in a row. That is incredibly rare. It happens every once in a while. The most recent people that it's happened to are Greta Gerwig and Adam McKay. Both of those directors have gotten 3 Best Picture nominees in a row. Actually, not Greta Gerwig yet, but yes, she has, because Barbie is in for Best Picture. So is Yorgos Lanthimos going to do it? It's very possible. I mean, Adam McKay, if Adam McKay can do it, Yorgos can too. But you just have to be aware that his success with the Oscars is going to dry up at some point. At number 7, I have Joker Folie à Deux, which is being released by Warner Bros. It's directed by Todd Phillips, stars Joaquin Phoenix, and of course, Lady Gaga playing Harley Quinn. This is a musical sequel to 2019's Joker, which is one of the most wild ideas that I've ever heard. I mean, for one thing, who would have thought there'd be a sequel to Joker? It didn't seem like a film that needed a sequel. And now here, they've got one coming out this year, and it's a damn musical. Now, the first film, like with Dune, was such a huge sensation that you kind of have to expect this one to kind of end up in that conversation at least a little bit. That could also be a detriment to the film because the expectations will be so high from the first that if this does not exceed what Joker did, then just write it off entirely immediately. But the fact that it is a musical differentiates itself enough, makes it novel, makes it unique enough that this could recreate the lightning in a bottle that Joker had in 2019. It also is a big bonus that this is largely the same team. Hildur Guðnadóttir is back, Lawrence Sher is back, Joaquin Phoenix is going to be giving his all again. So there's a lot riding against this one, but it's so interesting that it is a musical that I just have to put it in my top 10. Another thing against it, the fact that it is a musical might alienate some of its core fan base. You don't think of the dudes that love Joker and idolize that character as being the type to go and see a Lady Gaga musical. So yes, it might be super interesting, but at the same time, you might suffer from alienating the core fans there. But that said, I'm stoked to see this one. I think it's going to be absolutely ludicrous, and I can't wait. Next up on the list, we have Michael. This is coming from Lionsgate. This is the Michael Jackson biopic directed by Antoine Fuqua, director of Training Day, as well as The Equalizer, The Guilty, and many other movies. This one stars Michael Jackson's nephew playing a young Michael Jackson. So we're going to see Jafar Jackson in a breakout role here playing his uncle. And look, it's a Michael Jackson biopic. It's the definitive Michael Jackson biopic. Even if this is a piece of shit, it's going to make $600 million and it's going to end up in the Oscar race. No matter what. Even if it's terrible, people will still give it praise. People will still give it their dollars. It could be terrible, but I don't think it's going to be terrible because listen to this crew. The cinematographer of the film is Robert Richardson, who you might know as Tarantino's cinematographer. He did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He did Django Unchained. He's also one of Scorsese's go-to guys. He did The Aviator. He did Hugo. He is a multi-Oscar winner shooting this film. So it's not like they just hired some crappy nobody cinematographer. They hired one of the best in the game. Additionally, the screenwriter is John Logan, who is also a multi-Oscar nominee. He did Skyfall, he did Gladiator, he did The Aviator, he did Hugo. He's writing the script. This feels less to me like I Want to Dance with Somebody and much more something like Elvis, where this might just be too big to fail. That said, it hasn't quite finished filming yet. I think they've just started. They're aiming to finish filming in January, February. So we should see this by Christmas time next year. But it's possible this is one on my list that might not come out next year. As you know, there's always some films we don't actually know are coming at this point. The one thing holding it back is Antoine Fuqua's really shaky track record. But that said, this is one of those films that it doesn't matter if the director is good. It does not matter what they're doing. This is a acting movie with an editing nomination, a sound nomination, some crafts nominations, and no director nomination. It is like Elvis. It is like Bohemian Rhapsody. If this comes out, I feel very, very sure this is a thing. The next film to talk about is a bit of a wild card as well. This is Nosferatu, coming from Focus Features, directed by Robert Eggers of The Witch, of The Lighthouse, of The Northman. It stars Bill Skarsgård as Nosferatu, as well as Nicholas Hoult, Lily Rose Depp. It is a remake of the classic silent vampire movie Nosferatu, which is a ripoff of Dracula because they couldn't get the rights to Dracula, so they just renamed it and did the story anyways. Even though this feels really odd being in the top 10, there's something really intriguing about it. Robert Eggers is such an interesting filmmaker. He's already made a film that got an Oscar nomination. The Lighthouse did get that cinematography nomination. I think it's possible that with a prestige picture like Nosferatu, with something that is a period piece that has a massive budget, that's being given a mid to late December release date, that's being positioned as one of the biggest films of the year, this could be the type of sensation that breaks through and just cements Robert Eggers as one of the good horror filmmakers, one of the horror filmmakers that the Academy is willing to pay attention to. I mean, again, they already nominated The Lighthouse. How much more can it take? All he needs is the right film to connect with the Academy and break their bias against genre. Now, against the film, though, it is a horror movie. I just said maybe it could break the bias. Well, maybe it doesn't. But to me, I think that there is enough prestige behind this project. There is enough gravitas to make this a Best Picture contender, and it could be competitive to win multiple craft categories up there against Dune. It could be coming for costumes, makeup, production design, cinematography, but that all requires it to be accepted as a real movie and not just as a schlocky horror movie. We saw Jordan Peele get a Best Picture nomination and an original screenplay win for Get Out. If any other filmmaker can do that, it's Robert Eggers. Ari Aster, still a little bit far off from being Oscar material, but Robert Eggers does period pieces in a way that could captivate the Academy, could be just prestige enough to make them overlook their bias. Then, to finish off my top 10, I'm going to go with Maria. This has no distribution. It is directed by Pablo Larraín, who previously made Jackie and Spencer, and this year made El Conde. This is the third and final film in his Lady with Heels trilogy, which encompasses Jackie as well as Spencer. And this follows the American Greek opera singer Maria Callas, played by Angelina Jolie, and it follows her through the final year of her life, apparently. Pablo Larraín has gotten pretty close to that Oscar success. I would say Jackie was probably next in line in 2016. It was probably, if you could have added one more movie, it probably would have been Jackie. Spencer was a little bit further away. I think a lot of people got pissed off at how it portrayed Princess Di, that it just couldn't really make it, even though early reviews suggested that it might be a Best Picture player. But both of those movies did get their actresses into Best Actress, and Angelina Jolie will be in this year as well. The question is, can Pablo Larraín finally get into Best Picture? And I'm going to say yes. And my reasoning here is that I think the detriment against Jackie and Spencer wasn't Pablo Larraín's filmmaking. It was that people weren't willing to see public figures that they know and love so dearly as Jackie O'Kennedy, as Princess Diana. They're not willing to see those characters in this type of film. They know them too well. They have preconceived notions of what a biopic should be, and they're unhappy when they're presented with something like a Pablo Larraín film that's not really a biopic, that's a little bit scary, a little bit twisted. Maria Callas does not have that same level of persona. People aren't going to be upset that he did a Maria Callas movie in this way, whereas people were fucking furious that he made Princess Diana look the way that he did. So there's less baggage that Maria comes into the Oscar race with. He's going to get an Oscar nomination one day, and why not this year? Now that's my top 10, but that's not all. We've got 40 films to talk about here, so buckle up. I will keep talking. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much, and I hope that I can introduce you to some titles to be really excited for next year. Anyways, let's continue. Number 11, The Supremes at Earl's All You Can Eat. This is being distributed by Searchlight. I previously mentioned them with Kinds of Kindness and said that they don't really have many other big films coming out. This is the other big film that they have this year. The Supremes at Earl's All You Can Eat is being directed by Tina Mabry. It's being co-written by Gina Prince Bythewood, who previously directed The Woman King to quite a bit of success. It stars Uzo Aduba, Anjanou Ellis-Taylor, who pops up again after being mentioned earlier as well. It's a bit of a riff on the Steel Magnolias formula of a story about female friendship. It feels like it could be the mom movie of the year. The film that people think is just wonderful, is heartwarming, is charming, maybe makes you a little bit sad, could be a bit of a film Twitter villain. But honestly, this seems like the Heart of Gold movie of the year. Now, that said, a riff on Steel Magnolias might not be what the Oscars are looking for anymore. We've kind of moved past the mom movie phase of the Academy, and that's why this is outside the top 10. Not only is the director a little bit unproven, only really directing on TV, she did some episodes of Queen Sugar, but it just feels a little bit to me like this might not be what the Oscars are looking for in the year 2024. Who knows, though? This could just be so heartfelt and lovely that this ends up in the Best Picture race no matter what. At number 12, I have Anora from Neon. This is directed by Sean Baker. You might know Sean Baker from Red Rocket, from The Florida Project, from Tangerine. And this one stars Mikey Madison as well as Ivy Wolk. The plot details are a little bit fuzzy at this point. No one's really talked much about it, but it's believed to be a road trip comedy about two sex workers, and it takes place in Las Vegas and in upstate New York. There's not many more details about this one at this point, and so we don't know if this is going to be Sean Baker in his Florida Project mode, where he was probably in the top 13 or 14 for Best Picture. We also don't know if this is maybe Sean Baker in more of a Red Rocket mode, more of a raunchy comedy. If Anora captures that emotional heart that the Florida Project had, or that his earlier film Starlet, which I highly recommend you check out, if it has the emotional core of Starlet, this could end up being that big contender that we've been waiting for from Sean Baker. As with any film from a director who hasn't really proven themselves to be an Oscar darling in the past, it's really hard to predict unless we know the premise of the film. And since those details are being kept under wraps right now, it's really hard to predict Anora confidently and say, yes, this is a surefire thing for Best Picture. Because honestly, we don't know at this point. We don't know anything about this movie. It's possible that it's just not that whatsoever. At number 13, we have The Piano Lesson from Netflix. This is being directed by Malcolm Washington, the son of Denzel Washington. This is his directorial debut. He is directing his brother, John David Washington, as well as Samuel L. Jackson and Danielle Deadwyler. This cast all performed The Piano Lesson, which is an August Wilson play. August Wilson also wrote Fences, also wrote Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. They were all in the Broadway production of this in 2022, where they received a lot of raves for the acting. The production itself was less raved about. Now, you might notice I haven't mentioned any Netflix movies yet. And Netflix, as we kind of know at this point, we have to expect them to have something in the race. it's going to be something. But that said, their slate this year looks pretty weak. The Piano Lesson currently looks like their strongest film, and it's by no means very strong because, I mean, we saw a few years ago Ma Rainey's Black Bottom ended up not actually being a big thing for the Oscars. It got a few wins. It almost got Chadwick Boseman that Oscar, but it was not nominated for Best Picture, while 2 other Netflix movies were. This one could perform similarly, or it could show a little bit of fatigue, where maybe the Academy is just a little bit tired of the same August Wilson movies. Also because it's being directed by Malcolm Washington in a directorial debut, we don't know what the craft of this film's going to be. And because this cast just did this on Broadway, maybe this will feel a little bit more like a direct staging of a Broadway play than you would want it to be for it to make it into awards consideration. That was already a big complaint people had with Fences and with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, where people just said it doesn't feel cinematic. Regardless, I think you should include Samuel L. Jackson in your Best Actor predictions at this point. At number 14, I have The Way of the Wind. This one has no distributor. It is the new film by Terrence Malick. He has been editing it for the last 5 years. Yes, he's been editing this movie for 5 years. Every year we say, hey, maybe The Way of the Wind comes this year. But this year it actually does look like it's coming. There's been reports from people who are close to Terrence Malick that the film is almost ready. That said, if it's not in the Cannes lineup, I say pack it up. It's not coming this year. This is Terrence Malick's passion project he's been working on for such a long time. It follows many chapters in the life of Jesus Christ, and it seems more than a typical religious film. It seems like a little bit juicier, a little bit meatier. This feels like it could be a pretty massive achievement and potentially something that could really unite critics and those more conservative audiences. But that said, it's Terrence Malick. He's inconsistent. He doesn't always make The Tree of Life or The Thin Red Line. He makes stuff like Knight of Cups, things that just don't really work as Oscar movies. They might be interesting films, but they do not need to be Oscar players. The next film is number 15, Hitman, from Richard Linklater, being distributed by Netflix. It stars Glenn Powell in a fantastic performance. Now, this is one film on the list that I have seen. I saw it at TIFF this year, and I adored it. The premise of this one follows a Texas school teacher who works as an undercover cop in his free time, and he pretends to be a hitman to set people up. They come to him, and he gets them to admit that they want to kill someone, and then they get arrested. It is a wildly entertaining, crowd-pleasing comedy that I think is going to be a pretty big hit on Netflix. And like I just mentioned with The Piano Lesson, Netflix doesn't really have much this year. And maybe a crowd pleaser like this could just go over absolutely stellar with awards voters this year. What's going against this is Netflix has a tendency to dump films in the summer. And the fact that they bought this in the fall and that they are playing it at Sundance doesn't make me think that they're going to be waiting to put this out in the next year's awards season. It feels like they're going to dump this in the summer, the same way that they dumped Da 5 Bloods a few years ago. I do worry that they're going to absolutely screw this film over. If this was released in the fall, this would be in my top 10. But it looks like it won't be released in the fall, and it looks like Netflix may be absolutely shooting themselves in the foot, dooming themselves, and this one will be forgotten by next awards season, except for maybe like a Golden Globe nomination or something like that, which is tragic. It deserves better than that. At number 16, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. This is Warner Brothers, and you might notice this is the third Warner Brothers blockbuster I have on the list, because Warner Brothers runs the goddamn game in terms of blockbusters that are also awards players. Right now with Barbie, they are just killing it. They're going to kill it again this year, but they have so much to balance. Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga is the next Mad Max movie from George Miller. It stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Chris Hemsworth, and it's a prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, which was, you might remember back in 2015, it was a huge Oscar sensation, winning multiple Oscars for the craft categories. This could possibly repeat. I said earlier, Dune did so well the last time, so it probably will do similarly. Same with Joker. It'll probably do similarly. The difference here with Mad Max, the reason this isn't a little bit higher is because Mad Max Fury Road was the 4th film in that franchise. And up until that film, it had never been an Oscar franchise before. And it doesn't need to be an Oscar franchise. Mad Max Fury Road became an Oscar contender because it was simply one of the most acclaimed films of the year. It had near perfect critic scores. It had great audience reception. That's why Mad Max Fury Road broke into the race. What Furiosa needs is to be as good as Fury Road. If not, it's a tech contender. It'll get maybe cinematography, definitely sound, definitely visual effects, potentially editing. Otherwise, it might be a bit of a lower tier contender, especially because Warner Brothers has so many other films to prioritize over it, such as Dune Part 2, such as Joker, Folie, Deux. This might just be a little bit left out. But that said, it does look spectacular. The visuals look awesome. I can't wait to see it. I'm just a little bit cautious about going all in on it as an Oscar contender this early into the race. At number 17, I have Bird from A24. This is directed by Andrea Arnold, who you might know as the director of American Honey, or for the TV people out there, the director of Season 2 of Big Little Lies. The cast of this film features Barry Keoghan and Franz Rogowski, two actors who are critical darlings at the top of their game right now, with Franz Rogowski coming off of immense praise for Passages, and with Barry Keoghan being Barry Keoghan. Barry Keoghan actually left Gladiator 2 to be a part of this small indie film. Andrea Arnold has been around for quite a while, and she's basically due for some Oscar love. She already has an Oscar for a short film back in 2005. The film Wasp won the Oscar for her, but she hasn't been back with any of her features. We're almost due for her to be a big success. This could be that indie darling of this year. It is an A24 movie, and it all depends on what their slate looks like this year. That said, just like with Sean Baker's film Anora, which was my number 12 spot, it's difficult to see a director who has routinely made films that are not friendly for the Oscars and saying, yes, this one's going to be different from the other ones. Yes, this one is going to be the one that finally gets them an Oscar. But that said, there's enough about this that is promising to me that I do think Andrea Arnold could end up in that Oscar conversation for this film. At number 18, I have Wicked Part 1, being distributed by Universal Pictures, directed by John M. Chu, the director of In the Heights, starring Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo. The plot follows, well, it's Wicked, the musical. If you know the musical, it's this. If you don't know the musical, it's about the Wicked Witch of the West who goes to Witch Academy in Oz and meets Glinda the Good Witch, and they become friends, and we learn, oh, the Wicked Witch of the West isn't actually all that wicked after all. I'm not a fan of Wicked. The music is really good. The story, as you might have just heard, is not good. It's like a bad fan fiction version of The Wizard of Oz. I can't pretend to fully understand the obsession with Wicked. And the fact that this is a first half of the musical ending with Defying Gravity, or if reports are to be believed, not featuring Defying Gravity at all until the second film, this movie's shooting itself in the foot. If it was just Wicked and they were doing the whole thing, this would be up at my number 12, number 11 spot. But the fact that this is half of a musical that is already bloated, already a little bit of a chore to sit through, I can't imagine this being a huge success. However, it is going to be a box office sensation. It is going to make $100 to $200 million minimum. People love The Wizard of Oz. They are going to go see this at the holiday times with their family. Everyone's going to see it. Everyone's going to listen to the music. And it's undeniable that this is going to be a player in the costume design race, in the makeup race, in the original song race, and in the production design race. This is a tech player for sure. Honestly, it's hard to mess up with a cultural sensation of the level of Wicked. This is like a Les Miserables film. It is like a Hamilton film. It's that level of musical theater sensation. At number 19, I have Mickey 17 by Bong Joon-ho, being distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures. Now, you might be coming at me right now saying, but Matt, Bong Joon-ho made Parasite. How are you going to have this at number 19? Well, let me tell you, Parasite was a fluke. Bong Joon-ho is not a director that is interested in the Oscars. Before Parasite, he made films like Snowpiercer, like Okja, like The Host. he is not going to start making Oscar movies just because he had one successful film. He is going to go back to making the types of films that excite him, these kind of weird sci-fi movies, which Mickey 17 seems to be. It's a big budget film starring Robert Pattinson as a clone who apparently will repeatedly die and keep his memories. This is the fourth Warner Brothers blockbuster that I've talked about on this list, behind Dune, behind Joker, behind Furiosa. Not only is this not Warner Brothers' biggest blockbuster of this year, it's not even the biggest prestige blockbuster that Warner Brothers is releasing in March. While I'm really excited for this movie, I just do not think that it needs to be an Oscar player for it to be good. At number 20, I have Challengers, released by Amazon MGM, directed by Luca Guadagnino. This was supposed to come out this year and then got pushed back because they couldn't have Zendaya promote it because of the acting strike. The story follows two tennis rivals who come head-to-head in a local challenger tennis match. One of them is a little bit of a burnout. The other one is currently the best in the world. And between them is Zendaya's character, who one of them used to date and one of them is currently married to. It's a very interesting script. It's got a lot of great dialogue and could be a big acting showcase. It's much more accessible than Suspiria and Bones and All as well, and it could be a return to the Oscar race for Luca. That said, the April release date does not inspire confidence, and I did mention it was premiering in Venice. It was supposed to be out of competition, which might show a little bit of a lack of confidence in the film's quality. That's not always a great point because something like Dune back in 2021 premiered out of competition at Venice as well. So it's a moot point to say out of competition means anything, but, maybe still worth considering a little bit because Luca Guadagnino was just previously in competition with Bones and All, so why not be in competition with Challengers? This one is a little iffy to me. I think that it could be really big, or it could just be a movie that people like and then kind of move on from. At number 21, I have Mufasa, The Lion King. Before you say, what the hell, Matt? Why do you have a Disney live-action remake of The Lion King, the prequel to The Lion King 2019 movie that you absolutely hated? Why is that in your Best Picture list? Well, let me tell you, it's directed by Barry Jenkins. And not only is it directed by Barry Jenkins, it is produced by Adele Romansky, who produced Moonlight, If Beale Street Could Talk. The cinematographer is James Laxton, who is Barry Jenkins' normal cinematographer with Moonlight, with If Beale Street Could Talk, with The Underground Railroad. The music is being done by Hans Zimmer, Nicholas Britell, and new songs by Pharrell Williams. This is Barry Jenkins' team. It is Barry Jenkins' movie. It is not just going to be another Disney live-action movie, which is why I have some confidence in it. I don't think that this is just Barry Jenkins cashing in a check. I think that there's a reason he's making this movie. Now, that said, what if there's not? It's possible that this is just him cashing a check. This is him getting some Disney money to make whatever he wants to make next. Very possible that this is just not the big contender that we hope for from Barry Jenkins. Another thing that's not inspiring confidence is that the writer of this movie is not Barry Jenkins. It is being written by the same person who wrote the screenplay for the 2019 Lion King. I think that live-action remake is one of the most soulless creations in modern cinema. It is taking a wonderful, almost perfect animated film, draining the soul out of it for a tech demo. So it's possible that Mufasa the Lion King is just like that, and I hate it just as much, but it's Barry Jenkins. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. The fact that these are new songs being composed for the movie and they're not being composed by Elton John, instead they're being composed by Pharrell Williams, that is worrisome. Part of the charm of The Lion King is the Elton John music that comes with it, and it's very, very possible that maybe this won't be as special without that music. Number 22, I have Gladiator 2 from Universal Pictures. This is the new Ridley Scott movie. He just had Napoleon, and he's back this year again. It stars Paul Mescal as well as Denzel Washington, Joseph Quinn, and Fred Hechinger. It's set 15 years after the events of Gladiator. I don't really know what to expect, whether this is going to be a legacy sequel or something entirely new. It seems like there's a few cast members coming back. A lot of this just feels a little bit wrong to me. It feels a little bit like Ridley Scott might be doing this because he regrets not doing Blade Runner 2049. It's going to be very technically accomplished no matter what. I mean, Napoleon, whatever you want to say about that movie, I know I have a lot to say about it. I don't like Napoleon. It is very technically accomplished. The cinematography is very good. The production design is very good. So at the end of the year, I think that we're going to see Gladiator 2 kind of the way that we see Napoleon right now, which is that it might be a tech player, but it's not really a good enough film to make it anywhere else. That said, Ridley Scott could have another Martian in him, and this could be a big sensation. I just don't think it's going to reignite the passion that the first Gladiator had when it won Best Picture 24 years ago. At number 23, I have The End, distributed by Neon, directed by Joshua Oppenheimer, who previously made the documentaries The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence. Joshua Oppenheimer is one of the most fascinating filmmakers in the game right now. The Act of Killing is one of the best documentaries ever made. It is so creative, so inventive. Not only is this a narrative debut for him, it stars Tilda Swinton, Michael Shannon, and it is a musical following a very rich family in an apocalypse bunker 20 years after the end of the world, which they had a hand in causing. It's a great premise, and again, Joshua Oppenheimer is a filmmaker that I just can't wait to see whatever's on his mind. He's been inactive since 2014 when he released The Look of Silence, and if he's making a movie now, I think it's because there's a reason for him to be making this movie right now. I have all confidence that The End is going to be one of the most interesting films of the year, and it sounds like it could be this year's Zone of Interest, just in the sense that it is a critically acclaimed art house film, might play Cannes, might play Venice, might get a prize at one of those places, and could just be beloved enough by critics, even though it might bewilder audiences, to a point where it gets into that Best Picture conversation. At number 24, I have Conclave, being distributed by Focus Features. This is the next film by Edward Berger, who just did All Quiet on the Western Front. It stars Ralph Fiennes, it stars John Lithgow, and it's based on a thriller novel which follows some cardinals after the Pope dies as they form factions and try to sway the vote for the next Pope. It's almost like a political thriller version of The Two Popes. Of course, Edward Berger just did All Quiet on the Western Front to immense Oscar success, and this seems like an even more accessible, even higher budget film from him. He's moving into the Hollywood space with an all-star cast. That said, it is a thriller. Thrillers sometimes don't really land with Oscars, especially if they have an element of mystery to them. A follow-up to a surprise Oscar success is not always going to be successful. We've seen this many, many times. Florian Zeller came out of nowhere, made The Father, and then dropped with The Son. Emerald Fennell this year came out of nowhere with Promising Young Woman, and then Saltburn came out, and I guess she's still kind of in the race, but not really. Edward Berger is another person where it would be very easy to say, oh, he did All Quiet, let's just toss him in. But that's not always what happens. And this to me feels not like a disaster, but it feels like it's more of light entertainment than something important, than something that's going to really make a splash in the conversation. This is probably going to be a film that premieres at TIFF and gets solid reviews and then kind of just gets forgotten about with like a 60 on Metacritic, and people are like, yeah, it's fine. It's good. At number 25, I have Flint Strong, distributed by Amazon MGM, directed by Rachel Morrison, the cinematographer of Mudbound and Black Panther. This is her directorial debut, stepping from behind the camera to also behind the camera, but not directly behind the camera, instead in the director's chair. It's written by Barry Jenkins. And as I mentioned earlier, Barry Jenkins, we have to take whatever he does seriously, even if it's a Lion King movie, even if it is a boxing biopic directed by a cinematographer. This film stars Ryan Destiny, who a lot of people have been talking about as potentially one of the big breakout actors of next year. Apparently, her role in this is really, really juicy and has a lot of weight to it. Cinematographers turned directors, it's kind of a curse. I can't really think of many times when a cinematographer has then stepped to the director's chair and made a really stellar film. The one that comes to mind immediately for me is Transcendence, which was Wally Pfister's film. He was previously Christopher Nolan's cinematographer on everything, and he made Transcendence, and that film absolutely flopped. and now he is not Christopher Nolan's cinematographer anymore. I'm sure there's more to it than him making Transcendence, but that was not a stellar film. And there have been other instances that I can't quote off the top of my head, but it's just not always a good sign when you have a cinematographer stepping into the director's chair for the first time. Honestly, the fact that Barry Jenkins is not directing this one, but instead just kind of pawned the script off, that's never a great sign to me. I always think when a director that's known for being a writer-director has a project where they choose not to direct it and someone else takes it, that to me says that that's not one of the scripts that they're most passionate about, and there's got to be a reason for that. It's the same reason why the Coen brothers directing a film, big green flag. If you see someone else directing a film written by the Coen brothers, red flag. That's when you get Suburbicon. Not a good sign. This just doesn't inspire a ton of confidence in me. It seems like another movie that's going to premiere at TIFF and then kind of just disappear and get mediocre reviews and no one talks about it again. But that said, maybe I'm wrong and maybe this is actually really stellar. Number 26, speaking of the Coen brothers, Drive Away Dolls from Focus Features, directed by Ethan Coen. This was supposed to come out in September this year and then did not release. Instead was pushed back so that they could promote it free of the actors' strike. We always have to take the Coen brothers seriously. Now, that said, it seems like a little bit of Coen brothers in goofball mode. I mean, keep in mind, Joel Coen is not here. I kind of view Joel Coen as the driving force of the Coen brothers. Even earlier in their career, Joel Coen was the one credited as director, while Ethan Coen was credited as the producer. That was because of DGA rulings, but it still says to me their priorities. I think Ethan Coen is more of the logistic mind, while Joel is more of the creative mind of the Coen brothers. And to me, Drive Away Dolls seems like it's going to be light entertainment. I've heard people describe this as a B movie, which sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be very friendly for the Academy Awards. This feels less like a No Country for Old Men, and it sounds more like a Lady Killers, or to be a little bit more generous and say a Coen brothers movie that was really good but was not an Academy Awards thing, The Big Lebowski. It could be like that, where it's a good film that just doesn't really connect in the way that the Coen brothers' more serious projects typically do. Number 27, there is the Outrun. This has no distribution at this point. It is premiering at Sundance. It's directed by Nora Fingscheidt, who directed the Sandra Bullock movie The Unforgivable a few years ago, but more importantly, directed System Crasher, which was a really, really strong German film that starred Helena Zengel, the little girl from News of the World. This stars Saoirse Ronan, is the adaptation of a British memoir about a recovering alcoholic who returns home after quite a few years. I've gone through the Sundance lineup quite a bit. This is the only film in there that's ringing to me as like this could end up in the Oscar conversation. Nothing else is really hitting me that way yet. But there's definitely some stuff that I'm overlooking. But that said, every single year there are Sundance titles that seem like they could be players that end up just really not amounting to anything. So this could be one of this year's, it comes and it goes Sundance movies. But some of the pedigree of this with Nora Fingscheidt, it makes me a little bit confident, but not 100%. We're going to get reviews on this one very soon as it premieres at the end of January at Sundance. Number 28, I have Juror No. 2. This is from Warner Brothers. It's directed by Clint Eastwood, and it follows the story of a juror who realizes that the murder trial that they are helping with, they may be the one responsible for the death of the victim. An intriguing premise, but I mean, that said, it is Clint Eastwood making a movie. He's kind of been in default mode, kind of just making them and toss them out for a few years now. That's not to knock Clint Eastwood. It's a miracle that this man is still making movies at the age of 94 years old. He will be 94 when this movie comes out. That is incredible. That is an achievement in its own, but that doesn't make the movies good. That said, I could see if the movie is good at all, even if it's like a Sully level film where it's fine, as long as it's better than Cry Macho, there might be a bit of a surge to be like, hey, we should honor Clint Eastwood. He has done so much for our medium, and this might be the last film that he makes. So maybe there's a narrative around Clint Eastwood for this, but at the same time, I just don't think it's going to be good enough for that. If it is good, it's probably going to happen in some way, somehow, popping up at a few awards like the Golden Globes or the AFI Top 10 list. Number 29, I have Civil War, distributed by A24, directed by Alex Garland. The trailer for this film is out right now. It seems like a very political film that might be a little too relevant in this election year, especially depending on what's happening in the fall. This is the film's biggest bonus and biggest weakness. Now, the biggest bonus is that people might feel very politically inclined to vote for a film that speaks to the times that they're living through. Alternately, people might be burnt out. People might not want to see a film about the death of America as they're witnessing it firsthand. It's a little bit of a tall ask to make people vote for a film so blatantly un-escapist, something so hard to watch. The other thing against this film, I know someone who saw a test screening of Civil War and said that it was not very good. Now, that said, that was about a year ago. A lot could have changed, but to me, there's a lot against this film, including likely some backlash upon its release. So much can go wrong, but there is a small world where people just feel like it's politically right to vote for this film at this time, to make a stance. Number 30, I have Queer, with no distribution. This is directed by Luca Guadagnino. It stars Daniel Craig as well as Drew Starkey, who I do not know who Drew Starkey is, but I'm sure I will by the end of next year, potentially a big breakout role. Based on a book by William S. Burroughs, the famous beat poet. This is the second Luca Guadagnino film that we're going to get this year. He's obviously always a very interesting filmmaker. And again, this might be a little bit more accessible to awards voters than something like Suspiria or Bones and All. This script is written by the same writer as Challengers, Justin Koritsky's, who is Celine Song's husband, interestingly enough. If Challengers is like a medium-sized hit and then this comes out at Venice, this could get a boost from the fact that Challengers did well earlier in the year. Now this is here as the real awards movie for Luca Guadagnino. Alternately, the fact that Challengers also comes out this year means this could be overshadowed by it. If Challengers is really good and this is just like kind of good, or if they're both kind of just like, yeah, they're good, then both of them can get overshadowed, which is kind of what I'm expecting to have happen at this point. I'm not expecting either of them to really be massive contenders in the race. Challengers is a little bit easier to put higher up right now, just because we know more about it. There's also a chance that they decide not to release Queer this year because they have Challengers coming out, and why release a second Luca Guadagnino film this year when you could just wait for it at Cannes or Berlin or Sundance or even Venice the following year. So this could be a 2025 film instead. The 31st, wow, this list is, it's a long list, but hopefully I'm giving you some ideas. Bob Marley, One Love from Paramount. This is directed by Ronaldo Marcus Green, the director of King Richard. It stars Kingsley Ben-Adir and Lashana Lynch. It's a biopic of Bob Marley. It's premiering in February. That is not an inspiring release. A lot of people thought this was going to be part of this season's Oscar race, and then it was announced for a January release date, and people went, oh, well, maybe that's a wide release, and it'll play around Christmas time. Nope, it did not do that. They're just releasing it early this year. That, to me, says that they are expecting this to be maybe a bit of a commercial play, but not an awards movie. That said, Ronaldo Marcus Green is coming off of King Richard. We know he can direct actors really well, and Kingsley Ben-Adir is awesome. He is going to get a stellar role one day. It's possible that Bob Marley is that role, but I do think if it was that role, we would have seen this release either this fall or have them hold it to next fall. Number 32 is Long Day's Journey into Night. This is being distributed by Amazon MGM. It's directed by Jonathan Kent, and it stars Jessica Lange and Ed Harris. It is an adaptation of the classic Eugene O'Neill play, which has won so many awards over the years. It follows a family over the course of a day as they grapple with the mother's morphine addiction. Jessica Lange has won Tony Awards for this on Broadway. She could be a powerhouse. But that said, there are so many play adaptations out there right now. And unless they do something interesting cinematically, they are not capturing the votes of your average voter. So unless Jessica Lange is really that amazing or it stands out in some other way, this might just not be the big contender that we might imagine it to be. At number 33, His Three Daughters from Netflix, directed by Azazel Jacobs, starring Carrie Coon, Elizabeth Olsen, and Natasha Lyonne. This film follows three siblings who all clashed constantly. They're completely contrasting personalities, and they all gather together in their father's New York apartment to be there for his death. It's an incredibly depressing movie, but at the same time, it has a lot of heart. It has a lot to say. I saw this one at TIFF, and it's being held to this year, which means maybe this could make it into the Oscar race. If not for Best Picture, which I don't think it will be, I think it'll be overshadowed by other indie movies, but I could see Natasha Lyonne make it into the acting race. Or I could see the screenplay somehow pop up in the conversation in some way. While I do worry that Netflix may dump it in the summer or in the spring, if they hold it to the fall, this could very well be one of their biggest contenders of the year. At number 34, Nightbitch, distributed by Searchlight and Hulu, directed by Mariel Heller, starring Amy Adams. This is the story of a stay-at-home mom who at night turns into a dog. It's based on a pretty acclaimed novel, and they've been trying to make this movie for quite some time, and apparently it's one of Amy Adams' passion projects. Apparently, before the actors' strike, Amy Adams was set to receive the TIFF Tribute Award. I don't have good sources on this. I don't know where that intel came from. It's a rumor that I heard, completely unconfirmed. Do not take that as bond. Mariel Heller is destined for the Oscars at some point. She made Can You Ever Forgive Me? She made A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And I do think that one of her future films will get her into the Best Picture race. The major thing against it is that it is apparently releasing to Hulu, which would make it ineligible for the Oscars. Things might change if Searchlight does have faith in this. I don't see why they would release it on Hulu. This seems like a film that would be bigger than that. If it does just get dumped on Hulu, then this is not a film to watch out for, which is why it's down all the way here at 34. At 35, The History of Sound. This has no distribution, but it is directed by Oliver Hermanus, the director of Living from 2022, which netted a Best Adapted Screenplay and a Best Actor nomination for Bill Nighy. The History of Sound stars Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor and follows two soldiers in World War I who bond over American music and fall in love. Of course, Oliver Hermanus, we saw Living last year. That was a very strong film just in the production elements of it. It was a beautifully crafted period piece, and I have no doubt that this will be very similar in that way. It will look and it will sound fantastic. Now, that said, Oliver Hermanus might not have the level of prestige yet to really be pushed into the Oscar consideration. Keep in mind, Living was such a huge success, not just because of his filmmaking, but because of the screenplay written by Kazuo Ishiguro, one of the foremost screenwriters and novelists of this day and age. Not just that, it was based on a classic Akira Kurosawa movie. There was prestige baked in to Living. Whereas since The History of Sound has no distribution at this point, it could easily be picked up by someone like Bleecker Street and just absolutely discarded. But if we see this get distribution like Searchlight Pictures, if we see this get something like Netflix, if we see this get something like even Sony Pictures Classics, this could be a really huge threat that we just don't see at this point. At number 36, Mother Mary from A24, directed by David Lowery, the director of Peter Pan and Wendy and The Green Knight. This one features Michaela Cole from I May Destroy You in the lead role, as well as Anne Hathaway and Hunter Schafer. The plot is a little bit unclear at this point, which is why it's hard to predict it. It's one of those movies. David Lowery will get a Best Picture nomination eventually, but it's hard to say he will for a film that we don't know much about beyond the premise, which is follows a relationship between a musician and a fashion designer. That's very vague. I don't know what this is going to be yet, but it's worth mentioning regardless because David Lowery is one of the most interesting American filmmakers at the moment. He's the only person who could make two movies back to back, one being a collaboration with Apichatpong Weerasethakul, and the next one being a Disney live-action remake of Peter Pan. No other filmmaker could straddle the art house and the mainstream the way that David Lowery does. But again, it's so hard to predict a movie like this with so few details, and from a filmmaker like David Lowery, who is quite inconsistent. Peter Pan and Wendy was not good. At number 37, The Actor, distributed by Neon, directed by Duke Johnson, who also was the co-director with Charlie Kaufman of Anomalisa, and he wrote and directed much of the show Moral Orel, which is one of the most interesting and depraved animated shows that I've ever seen. It stars Andre Holland as an actor who is beat to a point where he loses his memory and left for dead in a small town, and he must rediscover his identity and reassimilate into his old life while piecing together who he is. It's a very noir story. Ryan Gosling was originally attached to star in this one, which would have been very, very interesting. He did drop out of the project for unknown reasons, which is quite unfortunate and a little bit of a red flag. It took so long for them to make. It was initially announced in 2020. They were supposed to shoot it in 2021. They shot it in 2023. And now it's coming out this year, maybe. There is so much up in the air, so much mystery around it. And here's the other thing. It's based on a book that was rejected by editors when it was first written in the 1960s, and it was only released posthumously after the author of it died in 2010. Regardless, this should be a really interesting film. Duke Johnson is an interesting filmmaker. I'm going to show up for whatever he does. At number 38, Back to Black. From Focus Features, directed by Sam Taylor Johnson. It stars Marissa Abela as Amy Winehouse. It's a biopic. It's another biopic on this very long list. And the question with every music biopic is it Bohemian Rhapsody? Is it Elvis? Or is it I Want to Dance with Somebody? Is it Respect? And I lean that way. This is that Jennifer Hudson, Aretha Franklin movie, where it's a good showcase of the songs, but it doesn't tell us really anything interesting. Amy Winehouse could be a career-defining role for the right performer, and it's very possible that this film could be that. However, Sam Taylor Johnson has a spotty track record, to say the least. Keep in mind, this is the director of 50 Shades of Grey. She's also the director of Nowhere Boy, a very good John Lennon biopic. So maybe we can't write off Sam Taylor Johnson altogether. This is being released in April. We see Focus Features has quite a few other films on this list. I don't see why they would release it in April if they really thought that they had an awards contender. At number 39, In the Blink of an Eye, from Searchlight and Hulu. This is directed by Andrew Stanton, the director of Wall-E and Finding Nemo. And of course, John Carter, for all of you naysayers of Andrew Stanton out there. The cast features Kate McKinnon and Daveed Diggs. It is a sci-fi story spanning a million years, essentially. Kind of Cloud Atlas-esque. It follows this couple in prehistoric times, modern times, and in the distant future. I've read the script for this one. It's quite interesting. It's quite good. Now, it's no masterpiece, but it is emotional, and it is resonant, and it is interesting. Despite being a big sci-fi, they're planning on it going to Hulu. That to me says that it should be low on my list, but I want this one to succeed. I want to see Andrew Stanton really make something incredible because he is one of my favorite Pixar filmmakers out there. Finally, at number 40, Mother's Instinct. This is from Neon. It is directed by Benoit Delhomme, who is a cinematographer, multi-Oscar nominated cinematographer. Now, I did mention earlier the cinematographer to director pipeline curse. This is his directorial debut, and like with Rachel Morrison, as I mentioned on Flint Strong, it is not always a good sign to have a very renowned cinematographer step into the director's chair. It's often just not where a cinematographer's passion lies to direct. This does star Jessica Chastain and Anne Hathaway. It is a remake of a Belgian film. Now, as much as the cast is fantastic, this has been in post-production for 2 years. It might be a little bit of a mess because of that. And it's based on that Belgian film that I've never heard of, that you've likely never heard of. Source material like that, I often look to think, is this really going to be something special, or is it going to be a remake of a film that was kind of not known for a reason? This might just be a little bit of a fun thriller that's forgettable. So that is my full Best Picture Top 40. I'm sure you'll be able to pick some films from there to fill out your list. There's probably some films that I missed there that you're probably thinking, oh, where is that? I'll give a few films that I found people mentioning I don't think will release this year. The first one is Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, coming from Netflix. This has not yet started shooting. It looks like they're going to be shooting it in April and May. For a heavy effects movie like Frankenstein, is not feeling like it's going to release this year. Chloe Zhao has 2 projects on the go. The first one being Dracula, which is a sci-fi western futuristic horror movie. For one thing, that's not an Oscar thing. That's Chloe Zhao having fun with her blank check. Good for you, Chloe Zhao. Another thing, it's not coming this year. The other thing that Chloe Zhao is working on right now that is not coming out is Hamnet. This one is an Oscar contender, but it's going to come out next year. It is a William Shakespeare biopic, which focuses on the death of his young son, Hamnet, which might have later inspired his play, Hamlet. That film shoots this summer. It will not be ready this year. After that, there is Barry Levinson's film, Francis and the Godfather. Barry Levinson is obviously an Oscar classic. He made Rain Man, which won Best Picture. This film follows the story of Francis Ford Coppola in the 1970s making The Godfather. I can't find any info on this movie. The last info that I found was news articles released in 2020. It's possible that this film just does not release ever, that this film was never shot and never will be shot. I don't know for sure, but it doesn't look like it's going to be ready for this year. There's, of course, also Jordan Peele's new movie, which was supposed to release at Christmas time this year and was pulled off of the release calendar, presumably because it is not finished shooting. Another film that I'm really pumped for, and I'm sad that it might not actually happen, Spike Lee's Boner. Boner was meant to be a musical about the creation of Viagra at the Pfizer offices. It sounds wild. It sounds like a lot of fun. I love Spike Lee, but it was supposed to film this past summer. I can't find any info about whether it did film. I think that Boner might just be dead. That might be a limp project, unfortunately. The next one is a Searchlight film, which if it does come out this year, it's in my top 10. It replaces Kinds of Kindness. A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic directed by James Mangold, starring Timothée Chalamet. Filming for A Complete Unknown begins in February and goes until April. I don't see them being able to finish it in time for a release date. This is not a Christmas movie. They're not going to release this without a festival run. I would see this releasing 2025 instead. That said, if A Complete Unknown does release this year, it is in. There's also Apex, the Joseph Kosinski, Brad Pitt Formula One racing film. I think they shot 1 week and then they shut down. They have not started filming again. They filmed a couple of scenes last year, and they're going to continue filming this year in the summertime. Apex will not be ready for this year. That is my long list. I've mentioned 47 different movies. This should get you thinking. This should get you wondering, what else is coming this year? Hopefully, I've introduced you to some new movies to be really excited for. I know that I am really anticipating a lot of the films on this list, dreading some others. But that said, I am so excited for this Oscar season to continue. I can't wait to see what happens. Of course, because our current Oscar season is not done yet. I can't wait to see what happens there, and then I'll go back to focusing on next year. But this was a lot of fun for me. And as always, thank you so much for watching. My name is Matt, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.